Welcome, everyone. This is Casey Robinson from the University of Maryland, Baltimore. So am I. My name is James Polli, and welcome to DDCP, Drug Device Combination Products 101. This is intended to be a training exercise involving identifying, developing, and evaluating generic drug device combination products. I can't forward. Okay. I'm sorry, we're doing something a little bit different. We have a laptop up here and probably won't do that next time. Okay, there we go. So I'll just say ahead of time, I know you don't have the slides now, but the slides will be available in about 2 or 3 weeks. All of you registered, those of you in the room here in Shady Grove, Maryland, as well as the perhaps 1,000 people online, you'll receive an email about when the slides will be available, as well as the recordings. So just a little bit about the Center for Research on Complex Generics. It was established a couple of years ago. This was an initiative of the Food and Drug Administration Office of Generic Drugs. And I know there's a lot of industry people here in the room as well as online. And you, of course, are very familiar with all the ways in which OGD communicates with you. And this is an instrument to really embellish what they already do. So as far as Andy Schwendeman is here in the room, I think in the back, she's also co-director along with me for the center. And our mission is to increase access to safe and effective generic drugs through enhanced infrastructure, communication, education, and research collaboration across industry, academia, and FDA. And I hopefully many of you here in the room and online are familiar with the center by virtue of some communications over the last couple of years. Again, as far as our goals, we're interested in infrastructure and communication, training and education such as this, and collaborative research. And we've had hundreds of communications, often web conferences with companies. We typically ask a couple questions: what education is needed? And also, what research do you think would be good? I'll just elaborate a little bit on that last question. We love when folks in the industry have very specific research. As you know, OGD has some research capabilities, and we do communicate with them, as you might imagine, about things that we hear from industry. So over the next day, be glad to talk with you about things that you think would benefit by some research. And thanks to the many of you who take your time out to talk with the folks in the center. For example, Anna and me. Just some things that we've heard about drug device combination products. For example, human factor studies are relatively expensive. It's very, very hard to have something be identical to a reference product, for example, due to intellectual property. And it's difficult to sometimes meet the expectation, the stated requirements from the FDA. Of course, there's also sometimes inability to access devices or separately work around patents and trademarks to make things substitutable, again to meet the high expectations of the FDA in terms of similarity. There's no available guidance on how to properly calculate a non-inferiority margin to employ in a comparative use study. And there's a need for more common ground whereby other differences between tested and RLD combination products could be effectively managed. So those are just some things that we've heard about, hopefully opportunity to discuss today too. So to date, after coming out of COVID, we've had 8 educational workshops, including just last month, our first in-person one. So this is actually just our second in-person one or hybrid one. And we typically get 1,000 or 2,000 people when we for our online components. And I'm sure we'll have over 1,000 today. And to round out our spring, we have one on nitrosamines coming up in the same location, hybrid, of course, next month. And then we do have a few more in October, November, and December. So please go to complexgenerics.org to learn more about that. We do have some research components on the go. We've completed a couple in terms of model integrated approaches for long-acting injectables. There's research on the go in terms of liposomes, in terms of parameterizing oral absorption modeling, particularly for poorly soluble drugs. Also in terms of inhalation area, in terms of some of the CMC issues, as well as PLGA peptide characterization and immunogenicity. Here's the team. Hopefully you've met us at some point over the last couple of years. I'll just say Visha, unfortunately, is not able to be here. I know many of you actually correspond directly with her. Jen is here. She's out front. I think you already met that. And Dana's online. So for those of you online, I'm sure you've been communicating with Dana. Okay. Again, I would just recommend that please go to our website, complexgenerics.org, subscribe to our YouTube channel where all the different sessions, I think there's probably been about 8, if I remember. So all of our programming ends up on YouTube. And I'm not a social media person, but I'm supposed to say, please join our social media. Okay, so thanks for your participation today. And much thanks for all of you here in person. Appreciate that it makes, it's particularly difficult nowadays to sometimes get justification. I know some of you came from quite a long ways away. I know one of our participants actually just got his visa from India and was just arrived yesterday. So I know it's a big effort to come in person, and we certainly plan on these in-person events as being very valuable. So it's a pleasure to introduce Rob Lionberger. I think many of you know who Rob is. He's the director of the Office of Research and Standards in OGD. And I should say that you do have on your tables, for those of you in person, there's a QR codes with regard to the agenda and biographies, as well as future events. All of the things are also on our website. And please kindly take a look at the biographies. I'll just say a couple things with regard to Rob. He's responsible for implementing GDUFA science and research commitments. And the Office of Research and Standards provides pre-submission advice on complex generics through pre-ANDA meetings, product specification guidances, and correspondence resources. So Rob, thanks a lot for coming here and kicking things off.
All right, welcome everyone. It's great to be here in person. Again, as Jim mentioned, this is our second in-person event for the Center in collaboration with the Center for Complex Generics. And I want to take a few minutes to say what the unique feature that we're trying to accomplish with the Center for Research in Complex Generics is. That, as Jim mentioned, FDA, we do a lot of one-way communications. We have guidances, we do a lot of webinars and trainings where FDA staff talk about stuff. But the hallmark of our events with the CRGC are intended to be two-way, interactive engagements with the generic industry to help you solve some of the fundamental problems that are preventing access to generic medicines. And so that's why we really, so if you come to a CRGC event, what you'll see is you won't see all FDA speakers. You'll see speakers from industry. You'll see panelists that have both FDA members and people from the generic industry, sometimes academic experts or people in the supporting industries, CROs that support the development of these types of products, bringing together the experts in this area, the people who are working in product development, and the FDA staff involved. And I think this is what we hope will really lead to advances in understanding, I would say, especially even from our previous workshop on the inhalation products. I attended almost all of the events, really learned a lot about what the challenges facing the industry are, what the particular pain points in the drug development process for those products are. And this really gives us at FDA sort of insight in, oh, these are the things that maybe are not so visible to us, but drive what you as the industry do. Some of these things might include, where do I actually source these devices? What types of intellectual property considerations do I have when I'm developing a product? What are my product timelines? When am I trying to figure out what my device is relative to the timing of my other product development studies or my bioequivalent studies? So a lot of that interaction, and we hope that that will come out in the discussions that we have today. It's really a learning opportunity for FDA staff to better understand what's going on in the industry so that when we communicate with you, we can do that in an effective way, but also at the right time so that the input you need from us about the regulatory expectations or clarifications can be effective in efficient generic drug product development. And so that's what really we're trying to do with the CRGC is facilitate those type of interactions and mutual learning through the various ways we interact in the various parts of this meeting through the presentations from different perspectives, to the panel discussions with multiple viewpoints, to the in-person small group discussions that we'll have. All of those are targeted at that same goal. And that's one of the key things that we want to accomplish with this meeting. Now, with respect to the drug-device combination products, I think this is a very fruitful topic for the CRGC type activities, because this is an area where, just to be honest and real about this, is there's been a lot of transformation and change about how we think about drug-device combination products over the last 5 to 10 years. This is something, I've been at FDA and OGD 20 years. This is something that was, in that first 10 years, not something that people thought about a lot or concerned, oh, is this a drug-device combination product? That doesn't matter. I think, and this is not just limited to the generic program. A lot of the reference products that we now consider to be combination products, that was not a consideration at all during the time that product was approved or developed. And so this is a fundamental shift. I think it is in line with the evolution of our understanding of the regulations that govern both drug products and combination and devices and how they fit together into that. But it is an area where it does cause rapid change in what we ask applicants to do. And it does also cause change internally in how we review things. And so an important part of this workshop, and this is why we have a series of workshops in the drug device combination product. This one, we've labeled it a 101, really to say, start with even the most basic aspect of this. What is currently a combination product? And help you understand how FDA makes that decision, how that decision is made, how you can, as you're thinking about a different reference product, identify, this actually is a combination product, because that product might have been approved 20 years ago and nobody even thought about that. There's no documentation in the labeling. The labeling doesn't say this explicitly. There's no FDA official list that says these are all the combination products. You have to be aware of that, and you have to understand as well, there are different requirements for submitting combination products. There are different regulations that you have to follow if it's a combination product. So, really at the beginning, it's just this basic recognition of, am I involved in the development of a combination product, is a fundamental question at the beginning. And hopefully this, this workshop will help you understand how that decision is made, understand that in most cases, you can, once you know the rules, you can figure that out. But, at this workshop also, it'll begin to explain how FDA thinks about understanding for generic products the elements of similarity of combination products. And so, you'll hear a little bit about what we do in the hands-on session. You'll get a sense of, like, when you send us a device sample, what's the FDA reviewer actually do with that when they look at your product and the reference product? What types of things are they looking at to identify potential issues that they want to share with you? And I think this will give you insight into, at that level, for the generic program in the Office of Generic Drugs, how we look at the comparative analysis. So really the first step is this a combination product? Should I be submitting a comparative analysis? And you'll be seeing updates to our product-specific guidances in the future to try to make that more clear. But as well, it's something that you have a responsibility and can look at as well, as if there's not a guidance available or they haven't been updated yet, you can look at the products too and say, this is something where I'll need a comparative analysis. Right now I know, and hopefully from this workshop, you'll understand what FDA staff do when they look at your product compared to the reference product and what decisions that they're looking at. So you can say, oh, this is something they might raise. Maybe I want to be prepared for that. And so hopefully this workshop will be very helpful in optimizing your development programs in that way. And the third thing I want you to take away from this workshop is to really be thinking about how you can optimize your interactions with FDA around the combination product development process. So once you know what's a combination product, what FDA does with them, the next step is, well, how do I get feedback from FDA about my complex combination product development activities? And hopefully here through the panels and the presentations, you'll get insight and it'll help you decide, well, when should I send in a control correspondence on my potential device to get some feedback? How long will that take to review? What will FDA look at it? What type of product should I send in? Thinking about that to optimize that. Because we do, I think, recognize that if you want to be very similar to the reference product and figure out if FDA will be concerned about some potential difference, it's good to get that information, that feedback early and do it iteratively. And I think it's important to optimize those interactions too. We don't want you to be in a situation where you develop a device, do a bioequivalence study, maybe even in the inhalation space, do a very large clinical study, and then suddenly get the feedback that, oh, we're a little bit, we have a concern about your device interface. Oh, maybe go back and change that. Oh, you used the old device in your clinical studies. Well, now what do I do? So that's really a part of optimizing the interactions. We've tried to put the device interactions in our control correspondence process and give you feedback early. So there is a mechanism to get that iteratively, because we don't want you in a situation where you use a device that might be problematic in pivotal bioequivalence or clinical studies and then iterate that. So really one thing I think I want you to take away from this is how to optimize the timing of my interactions with FDA. And for more, and if you identify more complex issues through the control correspondence process, and because of these constraints I mentioned earlier, you say, well, look, I can't market a device that's identical to the reference product because of some reason, right? That's the reality. And I think it's not FDA's intention to block generic competition by setting rules like that. But there is, if you have a difference, right, there is some evidence that potentially can be supplied to say, all right, does this difference preclude approval of a generic product? And in those cases, we really want you to engage with us. You've gotten the control correspondence that says this is really a difference. Then we want you to use, we recognize, as Jim said, in the feedback that we've heard from the industry collaborators with the CRGC, that the design of comparative human factor studies is still an emerging area. There's not a lot of them that have been used. There's almost nothing in the literature about that. This is an innovation frontier. And so we really want you, as you're beginning those studies, to use the different either control correspondence or pre-end and meeting processes to get feedback on those designs before you do the study. And hopefully that will help lead to a successful study that provides the evidence we need to evaluate your application. But I also want to point to some of the new aspects of our GDUFA 3 commitment letter that also give you opportunities to interact with us after the application has been submitted. And I want to specifically point to our post-CR scientific meeting. So if you're in a situation where you got a CR that says there's this device difference, you need evidence. That's a topic that you can bring to the post-CR scientific meeting to get input on the design of a study that you might do to support the difference that you've made, or to get feedback on an alternative redesign of your device. And we encourage you also to use those meeting interactions to make the review process clearer, so that when you resubmit or you do a new study, you have opportunities either in the pre-ANDA space, or if you've gotten a CR and you're doing and developing the comparative use human factor studies, you have opportunities to meet with FDA and discuss the design and get alignment on that before you do the study. And hopefully you'll take away from this meeting and this workshop the tools that you have available that you've negotiated in the commitment letter to help generic drug development. So with that, I look forward to the beginning of our meeting and hearing and learning about and helping address some of the challenges in the development of generic versions of combination products. So thank you all very much.
Morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Kimberly Witzmann, and I am the Deputy Director for the Office of Safety and Clinical Evaluation in the Office of Generic Drugs at FDA. I'd like to welcome you this morning to session 1 of the conference today. It's entitled How to Identify Products That Are Drug Device Combination Products, a CDER Product Jurisdiction and Office of Combination Products Perspective. The objective of this session is to provide you an overview of the regulatory framework that defines what are combination products, with our focus on those combinations containing drug and device constituent parts. Our first presentation today is entitled Definition of a Combination Product and the Complementary and Collaborative Roles that FDA's Office of Combination Products and CDER's Products Jurisdiction Office have on classifying products as drugs, devices, or drug-device combination products. This talk will be presented by two speakers from the FDA today. Dr. Ifeanyi Uwemedimo is a biomedical engineer and senior reviewer in the Office of Combination Products, Office of Clinical Policy and Programs within the Office of the Commissioner. Dr. Lauritsen is a combination product policy advisor in the Office of Executive Programs. Their presentation today will cover the classification of combination products, requests for designation, relevant regulation, guidance, and good manufacturing practices, and we'll explore some examples of single entity, co-packaged, and cross-labeled drug device combination products. Our second presentation this morning will be from Tzach Bachar, Director of Regulatory Affairs for Panelists Pharmaceuticals, who will present his talk entitled Challenges for Drug Device Combination Products, an Industry Perspective. His talk will address factors that need to be considered when classifying a product, a proposed generic, as a combination product or not. He will present some illustrative case studies, providing examples to highlight some common challenges faced by industry when considering these determinations. I encourage you to visit the CRCG website in the agenda or via the QR code links to access the full biographies of our speakers and panelists to learn more about their extensive expertise. After our second talk, we will go directly into our panel discussion and invite everyone from the panel up to the table at that time. Our three speakers will then be joined by our three additional panelists, who I'll go ahead and briefly introduce now to save time. At that time, we will introduce to the table Lisa Bercu, JD, a regulatory counsel from the Division of Policy Development within the Office of Generic Drug Policy in OGD FDA. Weiner, the Associate Director of Policy in the Office of Combination Products for Office of Clinical Policy and Programs within the Office of the Commissioner, FDA. And Brandon Wood, the Director of Regulatory Affairs, Generic Sterols for Teva Pharmaceuticals. Without further ado, we welcome our first speakers to the podium. Ifeanyi and Kristy, come on up.
Firstly, thank you, Dr. Witzmann, for not fully butchering my name. I appreciate that. Again, my name is Ifeanyi Uwemedimo. I'm a senior scientific reviewer in the Office of Combination Products. Today, I will be co-presenting with Dr. Lauritsen from CDER, and we'll be providing an overview on combination product identification, policies, and review. Again, thank you all for attending this presentation. I am hoping that by the end of our segment, you have a better understanding of our organization, how we define or identify combination products, the things we take into consideration during classification and jurisdiction. I do want to note that for purposes of this presentation, we'll be focusing primarily on device drug combination products. Dr. Lauritsen will address pre- and post-market considerations, and we'll conclude with references and resources in case you have any questions about this presentation or combination products in general. So a brief overview of our organizational structure. Dr. James Bertram is our current office director, and he recently replaced Tin Wen. Our office is comprised of about 14 people, including attorneys, doctors, engineers, and biologists. I have to say, I feel very fortunate to work with highly intelligent people, not just within OCP, but within the centers as well. I do want to note that one of our lawyers, Weiner, will also be participating in the panel discussions today. All right, sorry, minor technical issue. So OCP is a branch in the Office of Clinical Policy and Programs, which is an office, a super office that's housed within the Office of the Commissioner. We have a number of core functions, but our overarching role is really to provide oversight and serve as the agency's focal point for combination products. We classify and assign both combination and non-combination products in collaboration with the centers. We serve as the focal point for the agency and external stakeholders. We also ensure consistent regulation of combination products in all centers, particularly in CDER, CDRH, and CBER. We address internal and external inquiries. We provide training, and we also develop, review, and comment on policies and regulations pertaining to combination products. As I mentioned earlier, we work very collaboratively with the centers, and each center has its own product jurisdiction officer or product jurisdiction team. And their role is really to serve as the center's focal point for regulatory process and policy issues. They represent the center's positioning on classification and jurisdiction of combination products. They also liaise directly with OCP, and they work with us when it comes to developing policy, guidances, and regulations pertaining to combination products. So before we jump into the definition of combination products, it's first important to identify or define the three medical products that could comprise a combination product, which are drug, device, and biological product. The agency classifies a product based on its statutory definitions. The drug and device definitions can be found in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in sections 201G and 201H respectively, and the definition of a biological product can be found in the Public Health Service Act in section 351I. Generally, non-combination products are reviewed in their respective centers. In other words, a drug will be reviewed in CDER, devices in CDRH, and biologics in CBER. And without getting too lost in the weeds, we do have situations where biological products would be reviewed in CDER, or a device could be reviewed in CBER based on the technology and intended use. As I mentioned earlier, for purposes of this presentation, we are focusing on device-drug combination products. And on this slide, we have the statutory definition of a drug. And I won't read it verbatim, but in summary, it's an article that's not a food product that's intended for the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or animals, and is also intended to affect the structure or function of the body of man or animals. As you can see, the drug definition is quite broad. And if you think about it conceptually, all FDA-regulated medical products could essentially meet the drug definition. The device definition, on the other hand, is more restrictive. For one, it specifies the article form. For example, it could be an instrument, a machine, an in vitro reagent. The definition also specifies that the product does not achieve its primary intended purpose through chemical action within or on the body of man or other animals, and is not dependent upon being metabolized for the achievement of its primary intended purpose. And on this slide, we have the definition of a biological product. And again, I won't read it verbatim, but when you think about a biologic, think along the lines of cells, tissues, blood products that are applicable to the prevention, treatment, or cure of disease in human beings. So now that we've defined the three medical products that could comprise a combination product, what exactly is a combination product? Well, the statutory definition can also be found in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in section 503G. In summary, it's a product that has two or more different medical products or constituent parts. So if you look at the figure on the right, you can have different permutations. You can have a device-drug combination, a drug-biological product combination product. You can even have a device-drug-biological product combination product. So a combination product has three potential modes of action, as long as the constituent parts meets the statutory definitions. You might be wondering, what exactly is mode of action? According to our regulation, this is the means by which a product acts to achieve an intended therapeutic effect or action. In other words, how does the product act to achieve its intended use? So now that we've defined or identified what a combination product is, the next question is, how do we assign the product to a center? Well, there are really two methods that we use to do this. The first is identifying the primary mode of action, which is also defined in our regulations as a single mode of action that provides the most important therapeutic action. So say, for example, you have a device drug combination product and the drug constituent part provides the most important therapeutic action, the product would be assigned to CDER. There are situations, however, where the primary mode of action can't be determined with reasonable certainty. And this could be due to a number of reasons. For one, the product could be in early development, or it could have multiple modes of actions that are independent to one another and one is not subordinate to the other. In that case, we turn to the assignment algorithm that is set forth within our regulations. The first step, or tier one in the assignment algorithm, is to determine whether there is a precedence. We look for the center that regulates other combination products that present similar questions of safety and effectiveness. And if we can't identify an appropriate precedence, we then move on to tier two. This is where the product is assigned to the center with the most expertise related to the most significant safety and effectiveness questions. So in the next few slides, we'll look at hypothetical examples of how we apply PMOA analysis and the assignment algorithm. The first example on this slide is a drug-eluting stent, and the purpose of this product is to open up a blood vessel or an artery. The primary mode of action is achieved by physical action of the stent, whereas the drug prevents inflammation and restenosis, which helps to maintain patency. Because the primary mode of action is due to the physical action of the stent, the product will be assigned to CDRH. The second example is a drug-eluting disc, and the purpose of this product is to provide treatment for a brain tumor. The primary mode of action in this case is achieved by the drug, and the disc is simply serving as a delivery system. In this case, the product will be assigned to CDER. In this next example, we have a hypothetical product, which is a contact lens that contains a glaucoma drug. When we consider center assignment, we consider the PMOA analysis. In this case, there are two modes of action where the lens is correcting vision and the drug is treating glaucoma. The PMOA in this case cannot be determined because the device and the drug have two independent modes of action. We then turn to the assignment algorithm. And if you remember in my previous slide, we look for a precedence. For step one in this hypothetical situation, a precedence cannot be identified. We then move on to tier two, where the product is assigned to a center with the most expertise to address the most significant safety and effectiveness questions. In this case, the most significant safety and effectiveness questions pertains to the clinical performance and characterization of the drug, and the product in this case would be assigned to CDER. So there are three different types or categories of combination products, and in the next few slides, we'll address each one of these categories. The first category is a single entity combination product where the constituent parts are chemically or physically combined. An example of that would be a drug-eluting stent, as we saw in the previous slide, a pre-filled syringe, or a bandage with the drug. I do want to note that the definition of each of these categories can also be found in our regulations. The second category is a co-packaged combination product. And in this case, the constituent parts are not chemically or physically combined, but rather they are packaged together. Good example of that would be a first aid kit or a syringe that's packaged with a vial of drugs. And lastly, we have the cross-label combination product where the constituent parts are sold separately, but they're labeled for use with each other, hence the term cross-labeled. An example of that would be a reusable light source, which would be a device that's intended to be used to photoactivate a specific drug. So in summary, classification of a combination product is based on statutory definitions. Assignment is made based on primary mode of action or the assignment algorithm. OCP is responsible for assigning the lead center. And because the product is a combination product, non-lead centers are also consulted during the review process. So if a company has a product and they're not sure whether it's a combination product or a non-combination product, or there's a dispute, the company can submit either a pre-RFD or an RFD, and there are fundamental differences between both submissions. A pre-RFD, for one, is a non-binding decision. In other words, it's not legally binding. We found that it's often helpful for products that are in early development. There isn't a page limit. However, the longer the submission, of course, the longer it's going to take us to review it. There is a filing or pre-screening process for pre-RFDs where we ensure that we have sufficient information to move on to a substantive review. We have an internal goal of 60 days. And for pre-RFD, we say less information is needed, but of course, the basic information about your product is required. For example, the intended use, the device or product description, and how your product acts to achieve the intended use. And we also have a guidance document that sponsors can reference that provides instructions or guidance on what to include in a pre-RFD. The RFD, on the other hand, is more rigid. It is legally binding. We found that in this case, it's often appropriate for products that are well characterized. Their process is not as interactive as pre-RFDs, and there's also a page limit, a 15-page limit. It is a statutory requirement that we provide a response within 60 days. The requirements for an RFD can also be found in our regulations. And in addition to that, we have a guidance document that also provides instructions and guidance for what to include in an RFD submission. So once we've reviewed or completed a pre-RFD, and RFD, we issue a response to a sponsor. And in our response, we include the classification, we include the assignment, and we include a contact in the lead center. At that point, the company can then initiate communication with the lead center to determine the appropriate pre- and post-market requirements or considerations. And Dr. Lauritsen can speak better to that.
Thank you, Dr. Uwemedimo. So as she set up very nicely for us, once we've identified what a combination product is and which center it's appropriate for it to be reviewed by, then we take over the pre-market process within the center that product has been assigned to. The lead center then serves as the sponsor's primary point of contact for that combination product, and it follows all of the lead center's processes and procedures that are used. So for combination products that are assigned to CDER, that means it's going to go through the IND process if it's appropriate for clinical study, the NDA, the BLA, or of course, what we're all here to talk about, the ANDA process. And the lead center will engage expertise in other centers via the intercenter consult process, or engage with the Office of Combination Products as appropriate if there are specific unique policy considerations that come up during the review process in the pre-market space. So if we're following all of the center's processes, why is it actually important to even identify a product as a combination product? Well, that's because, as you've heard, they're not just a drug, a device, or a biological product. They are their own distinct kind of product. And we need to take into consideration the combination product as a whole when considering what the review requirements and the pre-market requirements are going to be for that. Because there are multiple constituent parts in a combination product, it is subject to multiple regulatory requirements, as outlined in 21 CFR Part 4, related to current good manufacturing practices and post-marketing safety reporting. As I said, it's vitally important that regulation of combination products take into account the safety and effectiveness questions associated not just with each constituent part, but the combination product as a whole. And in order to do that, we need to have effective, efficient, and consistent coordination between the centers to ensure that we are providing the same level of review for each combination product. And then in addition, it is a requirement that sponsors identify when they submit a combination product application, which is done through the 356H or 1571 forms when you make your formal submission to the FDA. And we keep track of this information in our internal databases. So I'm just going to touch really briefly on the current good manufacturing practice considerations for combination products. These are outlined in 21 CFR Part 4, as well as associated guidance. And it specifies that combination products are subject to the cGMP requirements applicable to each constituent part. So this is going to be the 210s and 211s related to the drug constituent part, or the quality system regulation for the device constituent part, which is outlined in the 820s. It's important that applicants demonstrate compliance with both the drug cGMP and device quality system regulations, but they can do this through a streamlined approach where they choose one base system and then add on the applicable requirements from the other system. So you can either implement the drug cGMPs under 211 and then add on specific device things. So for example, if that's what you did, these would be the specific callouts that you would add in to your drug cGMP system, these specific 820 requirements related to the device, such as design controls, purchasing controls, and CAPA. In addition to cGMP requirements for combination products, there's also post-marketing safety reporting requirements for combination products that applicants need to understand and be aware of. This is also outlined in our regulations. A final rule was issued in 2016. And there's associated final guidance that came out a couple of years later. It specifies that these requirements apply to the combination product applicant as well as to the constituent part applicant. And so we have a number of resources outlined in these slides. These will be available to you when you have these slides. And finally, most important is where you can go to ask questions if you have them later. As Dr. Uwemedimo said, the Office of Combination Products is always available as a resource for applicants who have questions about combination product status. But if you're already aware that you're going to be regulated in CEDAR, you can also contact my team at the CEDAR product jurisdiction address, and we can also assist you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank the CRCG Center for inviting me to share some of my thoughts and represent the industry perspective in how we identify a product as a potential drug device combination product. This is my standard disclaimer statement. My talk will be divided into two stages. The first part, I will share some general considerations and practical tips that we use at the start of the development of a product when we take into account whether it will be regulated as a combination product. And the second part, I will try to spice this up with some examples of products that I will bring from our world, which is extended topicals, but I think that can be easily translated to each dosage form that is considered as a potential drug device combination product. So here, and with that, let's start. So first and most, we should know the regulations. I won't exhaust you again with the regulations. My former speakers did a great job in presenting the regulations. I would say, though, that for us in the industry, the OCP website is very clear, guidances are very clear and provide essential and important information for us to understand the regulations and act according to them. In general, containers, the difference between container closure as a rule of thumb versus devices is that container closure are designed merely to hold a drug product, while container closure with a device constituent part is designed to also deliver the drugs. And you have here some examples of container closure systems that are device constituent parts like MDIs, nasal spray, etc. The second element that is very important at the start of development that is to know the RLD labeling. The RLD labeling provides essential and important information on the dosage form, on the dosage administration, and how the drug product is supplied. Specifically in sections 2 and 3, information can be implied whether a drug product will be regulated as a combination product. For example, if the wording says delivered versus applied, we'll see that later on with some examples, whether your dose is a spray or injection or even a drop in some cases, or just your dose is administered as a thin film or small amount. And additional information can be utilized to understand whether the drug product would be considered as a combination product if how you handle the packaging upon applying, whether you need to prime your packaging or you just open it. The how supplied section provides information on what is your packaging, obviously, what is your packaging system, and whether this is actually sometimes it's written that it is device or it is container. And the final element, which is important but not always applicable in the labeling, is the instruction for use. The third thing that we do when we come to identify a product as a combination product is obviously do our packaging characterization as part of our reverse engineering process. Especially we understand the packaging system, the RLD's packaging system design, and the dose administration and the administrated dose, meaning if the dose is metered or if the packaging system impact the way the dose is delivered and its properties. Other available references that are available, it's drugs at FDA, where you can find the summary basis of approval that may provide important information on how your packaging system is utilized and designed. Daily Med, where you can find the latest and updated labeling when it's not available at drugs at FDA, and other publications like RLD website, or other sites that can provide some promotional videos, how the packaging system is used and whether it would be considered to deliver the dose. And finally, as mentioned earlier, if you are not sure, you always can reach out to OCP and request for the designation or request for a pre-RFD to gain some more clarity. And with that, I would like to switch and discuss and share some examples. We will look at some examples, to spice up the practical considerations, how we identify products. The first set of examples is going to be a dosage form packaged into a tube. We'll start off with the simplest example, semi-solid dosage form packaged into a tube and applied topically. The dose is applied as a thin film on the affected screen areas. Packaging characterization demonstrate beside the tube's elements. No evidence is found during the characterization that the dose is controlled or metered or is affected by the packaging system. Accordingly, these products will be regulated as a drug and not as a drug device combination product. Now let's take the same dosage form, packaging to the same tube, but now it is supplied with an applicator and is applied vaginally. According to the label, the recommended dose is 1 full applicator intravaginally. Packaging characterization, same for the tube, but now there is an applicator wrap with several applicators, and the dose is controlled by the size or the dimensions of the applicators. And accordingly, this product would be considered as a drug product combination product. In that case, it's going to be a type 1. And the third example of the same semi-solid dosage form, which is packaged into the tube, but now it's going to be supplied with a dosing card and will be applied topically. According to the label, the dose is metered, is either 2 or 4 grams, depending on the treatment area, and is applied 4 times daily. And the label specifically direct to use the dosing card to correctly measure each dose. The packaging characterization, same for the tube, but here when you characterize the dosing card, which is just a simple plastic with drawing or with illustration, how you should measure your dose, given that the dosing card is essentially simple element in the packaging, it's somewhat considered more like a dosing cup rather than a device, and in that case, the drug product will be regulated as a drug and will not be considered a drug product combination product. Shifting gear to another type of products, which is liquid dosage forms packaged into aluminum tube and with hydrocarbon propellants and applied topically as a foam. According to a label, the dose is applied a small amount and thin uniform film on affected areas. Packaging characterization demonstrate that this is a pressurized can closed with an actuator and a plastic cap. There are no evidence that the dose is metered, but there are evidence that the foam properties are controlled by the stem and the actuator, for example, the foam density. And in that case, this product will be considered as drug device combination product. In that case, it's type 2. And third and last example, let's look at the sterile suspension for ophthalmic use. According to the label, 1 or 2 drops are applied into the eye. And here, the correct packaging characterization demonstrates that the dose, aside from the packaging description, that the dose weight and size are controlled comparing to the RLD. When looking at the regulations in general, a liquid medication dispenser should be exempt from device regulation. However, 2 years ago, following a Janus decision, ophthalmic dispenser have been transferred into a device definition and currently are regulated as device product, combination product. And in this case, it's demonstrating the importance of knowing and be familiar with the regulations. And this product is a drug combination product. In summary, in order to accurately identify if a drug product under development early stages will be routed through a combination product regulation, we should know and understand the regulation, know the RLD labeling, understand how the RLD's container closure system is designed and operates. And at the end, if you have doubt or you want a consult, approach OCP and request for an RFD or pre-RFD. With that, thank you for your attention.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our panel session. We are surprisingly early despite our little technical glitch, but here we all are this morning, ready to answer some questions. We're going to go ahead and kick off the panel session. So we're going to kick off our panel session with a question. We also have some microphones in the room for live questions. We have some that have been coming in by video as well, or by computer. And so I'll go ahead and take a look at the first question and get our panel started. If there are any in the room, please feel free to raise your hand, and Jim will come over with the microphone as well if you have a question. So the first question this morning is going to go to Christy. FDA guidance, trainings, and webinars have made identification of combination products easier. However, there are certain examples whereby the designation of a combination product is less clear. Examples include certain drugs used with devices but may not meet the criteria for co-packaged or cross-labeled combination products, and dissolvable inserts, but maybe not implants that don't need to be removed. For these unique examples, what is FDA's recommendation to obtain clarification on whether or not a product will be regulated as a drug device combination product? And feel free to share with anybody at the table.
Well, so as a first step, you can always reach out to my team in terms of whether or not something is a combination product. When we get these types of questions, our first thing that we do is we look to see if we've answered a similar question in the past. And if we have, we can give you a pretty quick answer. If we haven't, our next step is to reach out to the Office of Combination Products and our colleagues in CDRH in the devices and make sure that we have a consensus on what we think that product is. So really, it's just a matter of asking. If it's not clear, just reach out and ask, and we'll get you an answer.
And also just to note that that would be a good question to ask in a controlled correspondence to OGD. You can look to our controls guidance, which provides information on what type of information to submit with your controlled correspondence, and we'll respond within 60 or 120 days. And if we don't know the answer, then we'll reach out to Christy's team for assistance. So as you can see, there's just a lot of coordination when it comes to answer these questions in OGD.
Thank you. Okay, next question to Ifeanyi. Is bench data necessary to formally request from FDA a request for designation or a pre-RFD?
The short answer. Okay. Yeah, so the short answer is no. When we request for data, it could either be bench data or literature. Whatever information you provide just needs to be scientifically supported.
Okay, and a follow-up question is, does a firm need to request a pre-RFD before later submitting an RFD for the same product?
Short answer again is no. A pre-RFD is not a prerequisite for an RFD. The choice to submit either submission is typically a business decision by the company or the sponsor.
Great.
Just a quick add on to that. You certainly can in theory submit both, but bear in mind that pre-RFD process, while it's less formal and not legally binding, we treat them very much the same people involved. It's a thorough analysis. I was just to say that you can sort of pick which one you want, but I would recommend picking one or the other. Thank you.
Okay. Bill, do we want to go to let's go to the online questions?
Hello? Okay. Yeah, we have a few online questions. There were actually quite a few questions asking for clarification on one of Zach's examples of the semi-solid dosage form and the dosing card, whether that is a combination or not a combination. I'm not sure if anyone would like to be able to speak to that.
Christy, do you want to jump in?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so that dosing card example, we do consider that to be a combination product. The dosing card is used to both measure the amount of drug as well as to apply it to the skin. So it's being used as an applicator in that case. So it is a device constituent, and so the overall product is a combination product.
We also got a few questions for Ifeanyi. The question was, when would you choose a pre-RFD versus an RFD? And can you use both for the same product if you have continued questions?
You can submit a pre-RFD and an RFD, like Bar just said. We provide essentially the same information for both submission types. The choice of submission is really based on the company, whatever you find more convenient for you. For example, if you are looking to have more interactions with FDA, the pre-RFD route might be a better option. If you have a product that's in early development, for example, the pre-RFD pathway could be a better option. However, if you're looking for a response within 60 days and you have a well-established product and you're looking for something that is legally binding, you can submit an RFD. So ultimately, the decision is really based on the company or the sponsor.
We have a few questions around ophthalmics, and are ophthalmics considered combination products, particularly eye drops?
I'll start and then I'm going to toss it over to Bar. Generally, yes, eyedropper bottles that are intended to deliver the drop directly into the eye and are delivering, intended to deliver like 1 drop or 2 drops. We do consider those to be drug device combination products. This is a bit of a recent change based on the genus litigation that was referenced in Zach's slides, and I will let Bar talk about how we ended up in there.
Not sure there's really a lot to add to that, but yeah, so the briefly on genus, as you know, is important as classification in general, that the lawsuit basically established that we have to call things devices if they meet the device definition and the drug definition. We don't get to pick anymore. Although I'll note the court previously told us that we had to pick. So there you go. But that raised interesting questions because in the ophthalmic space, we had a regulation that we've been interpreting to say that at least certain ophthalmic products were regulated as drugs, even though they included something that we actually considered a device if it wasn't marketed as a co-package. So it was sort of an interesting tension in our regulations. In light of genus, we thought it was clear that going forward, that regulation should be considered obsolete, that we really shouldn't be calling products that co-package something that we would call a device otherwise with a drug, something other than a combination product. So we clarified that they're combination products going forward. And this goes to a related theme I just wanted to touch on from Christy's earlier comment about regulations, the applicator issue. You may not want to get into this, but at least it's something you can try to take a look at in the first instance before reaching out to CEDAR or OCP about classification. Is device regulations determine in many cases whether something is a device or not. So checking what the device regulations say, at least facially, can give you an indication of what is a device and therefore what might be a device considered part of a combination product. Although sometimes the interpretation of those regulations isn't obvious, and at that point you probably do need to get input from us. So don't assume you're outside the scope of regulation necessarily, but looking at a regulation, if it seems like you might be within scope, is a good start to see whether you might have a combination product. Anything to add, Christy? Okay.
Hi, my name is Shastri Bamadi. I want to have a follow-up question to the ophthalmic products. How about otic suspension solutions, which also typically use rather very similar dose delivery tips? And we have not heard anything in that respect. So far, it has been only ophthalmics.
Sure. So this is a good place where the regulations that Bar just mentioned come into play, because there is a device regulation that covers eardroppers. I forget the regulation name itself, but otic dispensers or eardroppers are devices per that regulation. And so when they're pre-filled or co-packaged with a drug, then they are combination products.
So you mean to say that sort of by default, it extends to otic products as well?
Well, there is a classification regulation that specifically covers otic products already. There wasn't one for the ophthalmic products. So the genus litigation is what caused us to reevaluate the regulation that was at tension in the ophthalmic space. So it's kind of a similar, but two different things.
And just like the ophthalmic area, I know there's a lot of questions and that comes up as a consequence. Just to be clear, that the new guidance is just about ophthalmic products, because we recognize that was a space where we were saying, hey, by the way, you're a combination product, and we're trying to give the guidance we could today, and then identify places where we might need to give it some further thought. So the issue of like lower risk devices in the ophthalmic spaces, that's at least at this point something we focus on specifically in the ophthalmic space. But there's other guidance on GMP, as Christy was mentioning earlier, which speaks to the issue of when a device might be a lower risk device, and as a consequence, a combination product, even though it's still subject to Part 4, if you can follow all this, doesn't actually have any Part 820 obligations because the device itself in that context doesn't have any 820 obligations, or doesn't have relevant ones. So the analysis for otic and ophthalmic may be pretty similar, but the guidance and sort of the enforcement discretion and stuff, that's all in the ophthalmic space.
And just to add, that's because the otic dispensers have always been considered devices per that regulation for many years. So we've always considered them to be combination products. The questions just started coming up because of the similarity between the ophthalmics and the otics. But the change from treating ophthalmics just as drugs to treating them as combination products just happened in the last couple of years. The otic dispensers have always been device constituent parts per that regulation.
I just have one more question, if you don't mind. Okay. In the last presentation, there is a reference to one of the products where you have a dosing card, and according to the industry perspective, it is not a combination. So I just would like to hear more the CEDAR possible opinion of that.
Okay, so yeah, so that question we answered briefly too, was that dosing card is both measuring and applying the drug. And so it's considered a device constituent part. So that is actually a combination product.
In terms of engagement, Robert said engagement between industry and FDA, so it's a good opportunity. So just to share in my example of dosing card, I also cited the exception of like dosing cups. And actually, we have the application which the product was not designated. In fact, although it was several years ago, maybe something changed in the way OCP and OGD interpreted dosing cards. But in fact, this product is not designated, was not designated, and is not submitted. If we make changes currently, post-approval changes to this application, under 356H form, field number 24, we do not identify the product as a combination, and we never got any feedback from FDA that it's wrong. Even when we made changes in a supplement to the container closure itself or the dosing card. I mean, maybe it's ambiguous or
So the details do matter on each one. So just because you have a dosing card doesn't necessarily mean it's a device constituent. If you're just using it for measuring but not applying, maybe we don't consider it device. But this is also an example of why it's so important that we identify upfront and that we try to maintain consistency in our identification of something as a combination product, so that we can be applying that thinking consistently across the board.
I don't want to make a splashy statement here, but I think this is something we probably should touch on. It was mentioned earlier in the presentation. It's sort of an awkward thing to say, but obviously we try to be clear with sponsors about the classification of their product. But the fact we don't catch something doesn't mean don't have the status. It's you have a duty now to tell us that you're a combination product under those forms, as you know. But if there's a disconnect there, I wouldn't rely upon that as a demonstration that you don't have a duty to be in the post-market setting to comply with combination products requirements. So this is worth bearing in mind. And if you have questions about that, usually reach out to CEDAR or OCP about it.
And I did want to clarify too, there could be, as you mentioned, that that exemption meant that it was exempt from being a device, but the exemption means that it's exempt from certain GMP requirements, not from device classification. So even if it's listed as like that liquid medication dispenser is listed as exempt in the regulations, it's still a device constituent, so it's still part of a combination, just exempt from those GMP requirements.
Which is also important because Part 4 is both GMP and post-market safety reporting, as you know, and the post-market safety reporting requirements would still apply. How burdensome that is practically, given the nature of the issues that might come up with the product, is a question. Kind of what's your system you need to put in place to be compliant. So that may not be a big deal, but that there's no exemption from that, so to speak, for combination products. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. One comment just for the room and for the table as well. When people are speaking with the microphones, please make sure that the microphones are really close to your face because people online are having trouble hearing us. So we just want to be thoughtful in that measure. So I'd like to just shift to the next question. And this is for both Tzach and Brandon. I'd just like to ask at a high level, what do you see as one of the largest risks for industry when developing a complex generic drug device combination product? What are some of the highest risks or the things that you most focus on in that early development stage? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with that one. So I think especially for complex drug device combination products, some of the risks are not getting early indications. So in line with this, discussion and this topic, I think it's very important to engage FDA early and often. As has been discussed again, there are many avenues, whether it's just a simple email to the combination product email address or moving on to a pre-RFD or RFD. First and foremost, you need to have a firm identification that your product is in fact a combination product, and then kind of build on that and say, okay, if my product is a combination product, what exactly are the requirements? And at least, from a risk perspective off of that, if you don't have a good understanding that your product is a drug device combination product, then naturally you're not going to prepare for the application requirements that are associated with a combination product. So some of the information that you might include, device description, design controls, 820 compliance, if you're not accounting for that, obviously you're going to have some very significant review comments, which can be a problem. Additionally, if you're not, in the beginning accounting your product as a combination product, you may not be completing a comparative threshold analysis, and potential differences, whether minor or other, would go unaddressed, which again would result in significant review comments. So I guess in totality, what I'm saying is early identification that your product is a combination product, and then build on that and understand what exactly FDA wants to see in an application supporting such a drug, and make sure that you're accommodating for any differences, whether it's performance, user interface, et cetera.
I will just add that in terms of the challenge that we have is characterizing, maybe the most challenging is characterizing properly characterizing the dose administered and the role of the device constituent part in the properties on setting proper properties against the RLD to characterize the product. Nozzle sprays is a very good example. So that when the packaging or the pump and the actuator play a significant role in identifying the right properties of the spray pattern, the plume geometry, droplet size, etc., which is the most challenging. Otherwise, when you identify a potential generic version, when you design your packaging to be similar to the RLD, then performing the right threshold analysis to identify any potential user interface changes that may be required further study as a human factor.
And I guess the last thing I would add is just to maybe build on Dr. Lionberger's comments that this should be an iterative process, even from industry. So, starting from product selection, getting that indication from FDA, using controlled correspondence, if available, as a pathway, use your pre-end product development meetings, your pre-submission meetings, at least, within our experience, the best way to approach right the first time application is to utilize an iterative process and the tools that the agency has made available for us.
Good morning.
Sorry.
Thank you for putting together a very good, impressive program. My question is rather naive. Is deficiency in getting a proper designation for the drug device combination is a reason for RTR? Any examples? Refuse to review.
So was the question, can you repeat the question? Was it that not identifying it as a combination product will result in
Okay, I'm sorry about that. The lack of understanding of lack of designation, proper designation for a combination product. Is this a reason for RTR? Are there any examples or precedents? Refuse to review.
Yeah. So if you incorrectly identify it as a combination product, that would not be the result of the RTR. But if you do not fill out your 356H and you leave that field blank, I believe that would result in a filing deficiency.
Thank you.
I'm sorry?
I'm just saying that the form cannot be signed without filling out the field number 24.
So then from an operational standpoint,
very convenient.
so then,
You know what is your problem with the form.
yes, then it sounds like from an operational standpoint, you wouldn't even been able to submit it anyway.
Yeah.
So that's the answer.
Is this on? Okay. Lots more questions online. I think many of them are asking about specific sorts of combinations of things and whether or not it's a combination product, as well as trying to understand what are the regulatory requirements on the device-related things, whether it's 21 CFR Part 4 or ISOs or design history files. Rather than go through every single example, perhaps I would just ask, where can people go to find out more, or if they have questions on a particular product they're developing, whether it's a combination, and what are the requirements in terms of some of the regulatory requirements for 21 CFR Part 4 or design history files?
Yeah, I would maybe start with the end of Ifeanyi's and Kristi's presentation. There's a lot of great references there, and then the obviously the combination product website, the CGMP guidance on combo products specifically is really useful from an industry perspective, and also just a lot of the remaining guidance documents that are referenced on the website there. So I would probably start with the references section, and I'm sure that would take you quite a far way. I guess I could probably also take that and parlay that into maybe a specific situation for a panel discussion up here. But I think sometimes in generic process and product selection more specifically, we're very early on. We really haven't even begun development yet. And, certain products may be on the borderline of whether or not they're even being pursued. And obviously, if they are classified as a combination product, this adds additional cost, complexities, uncertainties. So, we'd love to submit a pre-RFD, but even in that scenario, we're super early. We really may not even have begun development because we're still in the product selection phase. So we can't file a complete pre-RFD. We may not have photos or diagrams or drawings of the product. We may not have specific amounts of the ingredients. We may not have started a reverse engineering of the formulation. We may not have submitted a controlled correspondence to get QQ confirmation. So considering that it's so early on, are there any recommendations from the agency to at least get a preliminary to the preliminary determination of whether or not something may be regulated as a combination product?
Just to be frank, my initial reaction would be to say no. I think, clearly, if you're looking for kind of, I guess, a couple of levels of this, if you're looking for guidance on how to approach developing a product, first step shouldn't be FDA. To me, I think that's a consulting question. But that said, if you really have questions about what we think, you're really debating between approaches. You're saying we're considering this product. I think you need to frame up a scenario that's precise enough for us to respond to. So you may not be committed to it yet, but you're saying, this is what we think we might like to do. What would this be? But you have to have enough facts for us to be able to do the analysis.
Yeah, I would just add on to that, especially with respect to like not knowing all of the ingredients or reverse engineering. If you're not at that space yet, that can make it difficult for OCP to do a pre-RFD or an RFD. But it's not necessarily hard for the CEDA or PJOs to make an educated guess about what your product's going to be. And so that might be an opportunity to come and talk to us, and we can kind of go back and forth a little bit on what outcomes might be when something's not ready for a pre-RFD, and more informally.
Can I add something? At Daily Med, there is at the bottom of Daily Med, there is an indication whether the RLD is a combination or not. I know that the sponsor put the information, so sometimes or most of the times, the information is not accurate. It may be misleading. I don't know if there is any way, or I either regulate that or take it off. But to your point, Brendan, when we come to identify, we look everywhere. And if you get some misleading information, sometimes it takes you to a direction, which is the wrong one, and may potentially impact your development or review process.
And just one thing to know about that is I agree that it can be incorrect. But also just one thing to consider is it is really helpful to know if the RLD is a combination product, but the question is really whether the proposed ANDA is a combination product, right? And so if the ANDA contains differences from the RLD, you could have situations where the RLD, for example, is a combo, but the proposed ANDA product is not. So like a key example of that is a vial. With RLD is a vial and a generic comes in as a prefilled syringe. So just something to consider as you're looking for what the RLD says. The real question for us is what is the ANDA product?
Yeah, and just to add that approval letters the more recent approval letters are very good indications if you are RLD matching. There's usually a statement on new references to drug approval letters that your product is a combination product as defined by 21 CFR Part 3. So for newer approved products, it's really useful to use the approval letter just as an early indication. Not necessarily the case for older applications due to either redaction or just the age of the review, but for more currently approved RLD products, it's a really good stepping stone to understand whether or not you may be regulated as a combo product.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a really important point is, as we were sort of indicating before, what we've said in the past may not be super helpful. So we haven't always been that transparent about the classifications, going historically and pre the Cures amendments in 2016. I think that was a bit of a watershed, at least in terms of expectations shifting for industry and for us. So I wouldn't say 2016 is a bright line for good information or at the end of 2016, but surely before that, I'd be even more cautious about knowing what you're looking at. But the other thing I would say in terms of resources and analysis is, as you're saying, there's guidances, there's some list of examples on our webpage. Other places might be helpful to look at the post-market safety reporting webpage for combination products. has a list of product code types for device constituent parts, which at least gives you a number of categories of devices that clearly could be in a combination product. But all that said, there is an analysis to do here. I mean, sometimes it's just very obvious, but if it isn't obvious, you have to kind of go through the process. Is there a device regulation, you know, that addresses this product, or does it appear to meet the device definition under the statute? I mean, you can sort of do the work and sort of think it through, and then, which is important, because if you're trying to kind of question things with the agency, being able to really precisely develop what your thinking is, why you think it is or is not a device, in light of what there is in terms of examples and the definition and the regulatory definitions, is definitely facilitate things, because we see a lot of back and forth with sponsors about issues where they didn't really quite understand the facts, and you kind of go around and around, and it's got to be frustrating for you all to take the time and not get a clear answer because you're not giving us what we need. But if you understand better what the issues are coming in, hopefully you can make a better case and a more informed case.
And with that, I'm going to have to close out session one. So thank you very much to the audience, and we will see you back after the break. Thank you very much.